Welcome to tutorial number 1 for the IXEG 737-300. This one is called Basic FMS and Navigation. We are going to fly from San Diego to Los Angeles, and here I am at the default San Diego airport, runway 09, and I'm going to go through the written tutorial together with you, so hopefully to bring some more clarity to what we are asking of you. Starting on page 4, the pre-flight checklist, and I did load the 737, of course. I am at San Diego runway 09, weather's fine. I'm using the pre-flight menu, and I have the ready to fly option set, and I'm also going to put no fuel in the center tank, 7,000 kilograms in the wing tanks. There's some math involved now. 7,000 divided by 2 is of course 3.5, so we're going to put that in main tank 1 and about the same amount in main tank 2, and we're going to set the zero fuel weight to 40 tons or 8,000 pounds depending on your preference. And then when you're done with that, you click apply settings and reset to runway and check if it has worked. 3,500 in both wing tanks or main tanks, as you might want to call them. I am going to not really go over setting the, actually I will. Here's how to set the joystick and equipment. If you go to buttons advanced, then check this little line up here where it says Sim None. If you hit any of these buttons, and then like you can see on the left side there, they are lit, whichever one joystick button I'm using. And for example, I have set this one here to engines engage toga power. This works also for the 737, and you don't have to set a IXEG 737 specific command. That's the first one, sim engines toga power. That's just a regular explain command. But I have set up another one here to IXEG 733 autopilot disengage. And to do that is you click this button here, then you navigate to IXEG and you navigate to 737, and then you have all these custom commands here. So what you want to do is push the button, then pick whatever you want, for example autopilot, and then autopilot disengage. Click that, hit open, and then you're done. I'm just gonna hit cancel because it's already set for me. And you can test all the buttons on your joystick here in this buttons advanced command and use them up either to regular explain commands or to aircraft specific commands if they support that. And I have also set the IXEG 733 flaps 15 command, and this is handy in case of a go around where you want to raise the flaps to 15 right away. I also recommend setting that one up. I got some charts laying next to me here, so I know where to fly. And if you went over the instructor briefing, you know what we want to do. And I'm going to turn the page over to 5 now, and let's start with the pre-flight cockpit setup. The FMS setup is of course down here. Now please disregard what's in here. We are using this to debug the FMS in the final development stage here while I'm already doing these movies. So we're going to click init ref, and you go to the perf init page, and of course there's this should all be empty for you. We're pondering to pre-fill this with some default data, so you might see something like that or different numbers, but we're just going to put in what we need to do. I check the preferences again, and I check that I'm in metric units. So you can also uncheck this button, then you'd be in pounds, and then just enter the pound values as set here. And this takes us to page number 6. We are going to enter the zero fuel weight. I forgot what it is. Well, it's 40, but I forgot. So I'm going to bump over here. Check with pre-flight. This is basically talking wrong. Check with the ground services, talking to the mechanic on the ground, and he knows how heavy the plane is. Zero fuel weight is 40.9. So I'm just going to put in 40.9. It should be 40.0, but it's not quite exactly 40.0. Maybe some people showed up at the last second. Anyway, put in what it says here in zero fuel weight, and that's close enough. And you can see we got 6.9 tons of fuel, and the FMS adds that up and puts in the gross weight. Alternatively, you could also put in the gross weight if you know that one. The FMS will subtract the fuel and you have the zero fuel weight here. Okay, next thing is we are going to enter the reserves fuel. We have 2.0 in there. I said that we need 2.4 tons. That's about enough to fly for 1 hour. So we enter this one here. And then we want to enter the cruise altitude. This one is wrong, so we're going to put in 190. You see the transition altitude is set to 18,000. So if I put something below 18,000, like flight level 120, it'll automatically switch that to 12,000 feet. And if I put in 19,000 feet, it will automatically, oops, not do that here. Sorry, that was a little bit too much. 19,000 gets converted to flight level 190. Okay, this takes me to page number 7. And we are done entering this now, so we can hit the execute key, and this actually initializes the FMS to start keeping tabs on fuel and performance. And I'm going to the N1 limit page, either this button down here, or you can just use this prompt. And this is the what we call the N1 limit page. This shows what the auto thrust is currently up to, and right now it would like to set takeoff thrust. This is why there's an active here, and climb thrust is pre-selected. This is what it will later on set once we're above the thrust reduction altitude. Don't let that bother you now, but we're going to use full takeoff thrust, so there's nothing that we need to do here. Go over to takeoff. This page governs the takeoff process, and I said in the tutorial that this is the default value, small font, and if you want to override that with a 1, please do so. And then also the quick reference handbook default values here change, and you can accept those by just clicking these 9 select keys right next to them, and this accepts these speeds and will also display them later on in the speed tape. Here you can see them pre-selected already in green, and this will show up here on the speed tape. Of course, it does nothing to these plastic bucks. These you have to move yourself, and we'll do that in a second. Next thing is we are going to page 8, and we want to set up the airspeed indicator. It says move the little plastic bucks, and we want to set them to V1, VR, and V2 plus 15. So again, there's some math involved here. I know this is not an easy airplane to fly. 131, 133, we can memorize these two, and we'll need 3 bucks, so I'm just going to move the other ones here out of the way, and we don't really need them, so I'll just put them up here, and the first one goes to 131, the second one goes to 133, pretty much right next to it, and then of course V2 plus 15 is 157, and there's 150, 157 is about there, and we're going to use the speed cursor and set it to 142. I know in the tutorial it says 141, but I entered slightly higher speed, so I'm just going to put what the FMS tells me to in there, and then I should be fine. Okay, now see, we have this set up nicely, and we want to set up the radios and move the camera to a nice position to really look at your radios here. And there's the center pedestal. Of course, we have 2 nav radios. This is what we call the left side VOR, and this is the right side VOR. So we're going to put VHF nav 1 radio to the ocean side. It's 15.3. This is for the big numbers, and this is for the smaller numbers, 115.3. And the Seal Beach we want to set to 15.7. When flying with conventional navigation, it's always important to stay ahead again, always set up your radio. This is what we use for, depending on which side you are. If you fly from the left side, this is what you're tracking, this is what you're going to be tracking next. Or if you're the co-pilot, then this is what you're tracking, this is what you want to be tracking next. Always be one step ahead. And we're going to set course 1, which corresponds to this one. It's over here, and we're going to set that to 320. This is about the course that we want to fly to Oceanside. Of course, you cannot see anything when I turn this because we're in the map mode. If I went to the VOR mode, you can see the little preview window there on the left, and see that down here. And if I turn this, this is a conventional instrument that you might know. And the course 2 we want to set to 301 actually, which is going to be the course that we fly outbound from Oceanside, inbound to Seal Beach VUR later on. And next one is we want to set the pilot side, the left side, EHSI to the map mode. And this is basically look ahead map mode. An arc display, you just see the sector in front of your airplane, as opposed to a center map where you can see the airplane in the center, but usually you're going forward pretty fast, so this is more interesting than what is already behind you. And we want to set the range to 40 miles, and we want to see the nav aids. You can already see them here in blue, and we want to see actually, let me see what enable the nav and airport symbol. Okay, we have the nav aids, but this is not what I really meant. I meant the VOR ADF information and airports. The VOR ADF shows towards the tuned VOR, whatever, if you're receiving them, or the NDBs, whereas the blue airport symbols give you good situational awareness, and that's why we want that selected. And the co-pilot side goes to expanded VOR ILS. That is like an expanded mode again, but instead of showing map symbology, it shows you the VOR deflection of whatever you have set on nav 2. Okay, next is the MCP configuration. MCP, of course, is the mode control panel, and the mode control panel is here on the upper side of the dashboard. As I said before, it's used for controlling the autopilot, but also helps you in manual flight using the course. The speed is set up already. We want to set the heading, of course, to straight ahead while we take off, and the altitude we're going to cruise at 19,000. ATC is friendly today, they let us climb straight away, so we put 19,000 in here, and that's all done. Now the next thing we want to do is set up the pressure controller. This is something that you have to do every time you fly, or you don't really have to in the simulator, but of course in the real plane. And we're using the auto mode, which is the most convenient mode to use. All you need to do is set the flight altitude, and you need to set the landing elevation, and Los Angeles is just at about 50 feet. Make sure that you're in flight. This pressurizes the cabin appropriately, and you don't have to worry about this anymore until after landing. Going to page 10, we have done that, and already page 11 we are going to set the auto brake, and I'm jumping back to my default view for that. Auto brake is down here just by the gear lever, and short self-check, and it's done. RTO, and we will move the flaps to 1. I'm just going to use my joystick button. You see the flap lever move, and here the flaps start extending. Also leading edge flaps, of course. And we're going to set up the trim until it's at about 4. Well, as you can tell, it already is right about there, so that's fine. And now we want to turn on the inboard landing lights and the strobe lights. Inboard landing lights are right here, these two, and the strobe light is over here. Turn these on, and of course you can jump outside with the shift view. And of course I'm using a Lufthansa livery here, but we don't have winglets. We never had. I wish we had. So we're just going to remove them real quick, and this is more to what the plane should look like. Okay, the strobes are on, beacon is on, the landing lights are on, so that means we are ready to go. Turning over to page 12, you've been through this before with the takeoff. I'm just going to show you once more that what you need to pay attention to, so you don't confuse the toga buttons with the auto throttle disengage buttons. There are two buttons here on the thrust lever, and they're labeled, so there shouldn't be any confusion. This is for the auto takeoff go around, and these here are for the auto thrust disengage. And don't confuse them. I know my throttle is a little jittery. Ideally you map them to the joystick buttons so you don't get into the threat of confusing them here. And of course, for the auto throttle to work, you need it to be armed. I don't think I have that in the manual yet, but I'm going to put it in there. Okie dokie. You know how to take off. We've been through this one before. I'm going to start the stopwatch here, and actually starting the chronometer and the stopwatch, so they're good to go. And off we go. Releasing the parking brake with my pedals, and I'm using my joystick to go, or my joystick throttle here to go to about 40% N1. So here we are. And then once we're at 40%, of course, the airplane starts moving already. I'm hitting the toga button. This one gets lit up. You see here, this is the important one, N1. So plane is accelerating, and I'm pushing my joystick throttles forward all the way, so I can yank them back in case I want to reject the takeoff. Okay, here we go. 80 knots. Thrust hold. And V1 VR, off we go. 10 degrees pitch. Plane starts flying. Go up to about 20 degrees in pitch. Gear up. And you see airspeed stabilizes just over that little plastic bug. You see the auto thrust goes to arm. It also does so during manual flight. It's not dependent on the flight director, any LNAV, VNAV modes or whatever. It stays in arm until you get to the thrust reduction altitude right here, and then it will go to N1 climb power, and you can start lowering the notes. Okay, let's start the left turn here. And of course I'm turning towards Oceanside. I'm looking at that little green pointer down there, so passing 190 knots, flaps up, and trying to stay with it at about 10 degrees nose up pitch. 10 degrees and climb power almost always gets you 250 knots, which is great for climb out below 10,000 feet. You can see that green marker, green line on the EHSI labeled V1. This is VHF nav 1, and you can see that it points pretty much directly to the green symbol that we have there for Oceanside. And the VOR is not a very high precision instrument, so there can be some discrepancy between where the map says that Oceanside is and the VOR says so. There are also some other effects coming into play here. Okay, climbing out, 10 degrees, you can see the speed is increasing, flaps are up, and I'm turning this over here to page 14, 15 to the climb. Next thing is we're going to pass the 10,000 feet. I didn't pay attention to my pitch, and you see the speed already increased a little bit. And So coming back to 250, climbing towards Oceanside. VOR, 250, 10 degrees. Now I'm trying to read the manual at the same time while flying, which is certainly not a good idea. And please excuse my sloppy flying. But next things that are going to happen is passing 10,000 feet. A couple of things to do then. And of course, always take time to look out the window and enjoy the view. Okay, 9,200 and climbing. Heading looks good. And as I'm passing 10,000 feet, it's time to, didn't mention this in the tutorial, but we do it as soon as the flaps are up. Actually turn these ones off. You turn off the landing light. You put the gear lever to off and disarm the auto brake. Put the auto brake to off. And now that we're over 10,000 feet, we want to accelerate to climb speed, which is about 290 knots. So again, memorize 5 degrees of pitch, and climb power usually gets you about 300 knots of airspeed. And of course there's some trimming involved. As the plane starts accelerating, the nose will want to rise up again. So be prepared to counter that. Alright. Here we are. 290 knots, pitch just over 5 degrees. Of course this depends on the weight of the aircraft, temperature, all these things, but 5 degrees and climb power is always a good ballpark setting. So the next things we're looking for is coming up on the 19,000 feet, and of course we want to make the turn to SLI once we're over Oceanside. After Oceanside we're going to track 301 outbound. And one thing we haven't done so far is set our heading back towards the front of the airplane. We always like to do that out of habit. And the next direction is 301. We have it over here in course number 2, so this is a good way to memorize. And we cannot see Seal Beach on the map yet. It should be over here somewhere, and it's not getting picked up by VHF nav 2. The line is pointing straight to the side here. You can also reference the RMI, the radio magnetic indicator. Down here we have the thin line pointing towards whatever is set on VHF nav 1, and there's this thick dual line with a pointer pointing to whatever is set to VHF nav 2, and if nothing is received, it points straight to the side. This can be deceiving, of course, but pointing straight to the side means usually there's no reception, and you can verify that by the needle not moving. Of course, it could be that the VOR that you have tuned is straight by your side, straight 90 degrees off the side, but if the needle points that way, be wary that you might not have any reception. Okay, coming up here on the 19,000 feet, I am going to disengage N1, grab control of my thrust levers, pull them back a little bit. We'll need about 85% or so during cruise, so time to come back. The altitude alert going, meaning I'm coming up on my selected altitude a little too fast, and I'm coming down with the nose and coming back with thrust a little more. And of course we want to see about 300 knots of indicated airspeed. Of course, hand flying at 300 knots is not easy. Be prepared for some altitude, airspeed, and other excursions. It is possible to trim the plane, and you see 85 was a little too much. I don't know if I wrote anything in the manual on that, but it's probably going to be a little... Oh, here we go. 75 degrees and 1 degree nose up. So not a surprise I'm going too fast. Passing over Oceanside, so I'm making the turn here, and you can see in the meantime that Seal Beach is indicating coming a little too high, so I'm coming back on the thrust and going back to 19,000 feet. Nice shallow bank. Of course, as you bank, you always, the nose tends to drop, so that's not really helping you in achieving stable trimmed flight. As I level my wings, you see the nose tends to come back up. And just be very gentle with the trim switches, and of course you can always use the mouse to trim just ever so slightly. This is what I do in the real airplane. If I ever fly it manually at this altitude, you can do so, and it's good practice, but you really have to be careful not to send anyone floating down the aisle in the back. Okay, we're in the cruise phase, and I'm going to pause the simulation now, just as we advise you to do in the tutorial. Just setting myself up for a climb back to 19,000 here again, and simulation is paused. So we're going to do all the stuff that is now on page 19 and the following. Of course, if you once you're sufficient, you have all this planned out ahead, and you can do that stuff while you are in the descent, or you have a co-pilot that helps you. But of course here we don't. So we're just going to go over really quick what it says here. We're going to use or arm the auto brake, the speed brake. Well, we can't do that. We have to be flying. We're in pause mode, so we have to do that in a second. Remind me. And of course, I didn't think of that when I wrote this manual. We are going to set up... Actually, I went a little too far. We're on page 19, descent approach preparation. So it says about 40 nautical miles to go. We're already at 36, so we wasted a little bit of time leveling off and flying around. And we're going to set 108.5 on VHF nav 1. This is the ILS to fly later on. And we're going to set the inbound course as well, which is 251. Here we go. And we are going to set the MCP altitude to 4,000 feet, which is where we want to start our approach at. And we're going to use an airspeed of 275 for the descent. So I'm going to move that over here now, and a little too far. So we have a reference during descent. What else? Okay, we want to check the approach page. If you click on init ref while you're in flight, it'll always take you to the approach page. And we're going to do a flaps 30 landing. We just click here. This copies the 130 down here, and we click again to insert it. It gets big again, big font, and you know what this means already. It will be later on here on the E80i speed tape as a reference. And page 20 says we want to move again the plastic bugs. One needs to be at VREF, so we only need one bug. Again, one that we can move away, and we have one at 130 and another one at 145. Again, VREF plus 15. And of course, you see this still needs to move. The simulation is paused, so don't be alarmed. And we want to set the auto brake to 2. That helps us brake in the airplane after we land. And of course, we get going again. Unpause, start the descent right away, and things will go fairly quick now. So I'm unpausing and thrust to idle. You see the speed cursor did move to 275 as I unpaused, and we're starting the descent. I said about 2 degrees pitch, -2 degrees pitch, and you see as I put that little black square just beneath the horizon that we are starting the descent. Okay, I'm still tracking towards SLI. You can see down here that there's SLI, and we are flying pretty much towards it. So hopefully things will turn out well, and I'm going to arm the speed brake now by moving it back ever so slightly. Whoops, that was a little too much. Here's the speed brake armed, or as I said before, do it with the joystick button, and that always makes sure that it's at the right position. Speed brake down 1 notch. Okay, plan ahead. What's the thing to do next? We'll be turning to 340 degrees after passing SLI, or actually 330 degrees it is, because we want to fly towards the MERS intersection, which is on the final track, or the center line for ILS-24 right already. It's about 12 miles to go from SLI to MERS. So over SLI we want to be at 6,000 feet, and you can do some quick math. 20 miles is about 6,000 feet, a little more. So when this passes the when SLI passes the 20 miles to go mark, we want to be at 12,000. If you're higher than that, then we tend to be too high, and we need to do something. And I think since I waited a little long with the descent, this is what's happening. It's not good to be too low on a descent, because then you'll have to add thrust later on, especially when you're flying low. Adding thrust is expensive. There's a lot of fuel getting used, but the one thing that's worse is being too high, and so you rather use the speed brake. There's the coastline, and looking towards Long Beach back here, so we're in the right vicinity. Okay, as I said, we'll check 20 miles, 12,000, just a tad high. So what are we going to do? We're going to use the speed brake here to help us come down a little bit. Memorize, I'm at about 2,500 feet, and I'm pulling it all the way to the flight detent. Don't go further, that's Boeing doesn't allow that. This is only for ground operation. If you want to make sure that you have it right, you use the joystick button, and you see about here is where it needs to go, not further than that. You see the descent rate does increase a little bit. Speed brake on the 737 is unfortunately not very effective, and that's why you want to use it early and try to use it at as high a speed as possible. That's when it's most effective. And the next thing happening is going to be, we're going to pass 10,000 feet. I will already turn on the landing lights, get that out of the way, and I will also turn the ignition back to continuous. You're supposed to do it just after you extend the flaps, but I'll do it now, and this will help me hopefully have less stress later on during the approach. 10 miles to go to SLI, should be about 9,000 feet, so we'll see how we're doing. This is the 10-mile ring, and I think this should work okay. Of course, we still need to slow down to 250 knots as we pass 10,000 feet, which is now. Going to use some nose up trim here. Not enough, so I'll have to help with the nose or with the yoke, pulling back a little. And of course, you don't want to be faster than 250 knots, and I can also use the speed cursor to help me, so I have a reference here. And I'm passing 250 now, so now it's okay to go below 10,000. Continue with my descent. At 250 you want to be with the nose pretty much on the horizon, and that should be 250. I'm still tracking towards SLI. I think it's time to retract the speed brakes, so I'm using that button, and of course make sure that they are still armed. Speed brake armed light is right here, so we should be okay. Now looking at your EHSI, the electronic horizontal situation indicator, here's SLI, there's the airport. you want to land this way, so we're going to turn to 330 here and then fly like this, so we are in fairly good shape. And not paying attention again, you see what happens, nose comes up and we're leveling, or we're not descending like we should anymore, so I'm going to push that back down. You can see this little green arc here. This green arc is an indication of where the plane will hit or intersect, sounds a little nicer, the set MCP altitude. I set 4,000 feet, so at a ground speed of 277 knots and a descent rate of 2,000 and something feet, we will get to 4,000 feet just in 9 miles or so. So this is okay, because after we level off at 4,000, we want to slow down at 180. I will already set the speed cursor to 180. Do what you can in advance when you have time. This makes hand flying so much easier. 2.7 miles to go to SLI, and remember the next heading will be 330, so I'm going to set that up, and then we have this reference here, and I will actually reduce the range here a little bit. I didn't mention this in the tutorial, but of course this lets you see a little bit better what's going on. Okay, 3,000 feet to go in the descent, and we are just coming up overhead SLI, so I'm going to start the turn here to 330 degrees. Of course you could set up the radial 330 now for a better reference, but you might as well also reference to the RMI instrument that is down here, and you can see once this little tail comes here to the 330 mark, then you are on the desired radial. 2,000 feet to go, and remember it's about 12 miles to go from SLI to the ILS. Here's the localizer, so we're going to be watching this, and of course the challenge is here not to come too high and then be too fast and too high on the turn towards the final, so we also need to allow a little bit of turning time. It's if you look at the approach chart, I think it's 12.3, so we want to turn at about 10 and a little bit to start to not overshoot too much. And we are now at 5 miles to go, so we do have another 5 miles before we start the turn, and that should come out fairly nice. You can see the glide slope is we're already below the glide slope. That's also something that we want to see. The needle is still pointing a little to the left. That means we're not on the 330, we're on the 320 something radial. So to adjust for that, I'm going to turn right a little bit more, and this should make us go onto the radial a little better. Okay, coming up on the 4,000, another 400 feet to go. Get ready to slow down to 180 and deploy flaps according to the flaps speed schedule that we have, and you can read that of course on page 22 what's going on with that. Here's the 4,000. Busy with the manual, missing my level off, and get ready to trim of course. 9.5 from SLI. Trimming. As the plane gets slower, the nose will want to drop. And approaching 210 knots, I go to flaps 1 and set my heading buck 251, which is the inbound course. Whoops, a little too far. And start the turn. Go. Of course, losing altitude now as I slow down even further. Here comes the localizer. Good time to go to 30-degree bank. Watch the speed. Don't go too slow. I'm adding some thrust already. At 190 knots. Flaps 5. We did overshoot a little bit. That's okay. We're still 15 miles out, so there's plenty of time to re-intercept. and I'm going to about 60% to maintain level until we come up on the glide slope. Here comes the glide slope, and of course nose about 5 degrees, about 60%, and I should keep you level, and one should keep you level. I'm on the localizer again, turning right, and here comes the glide slope, so I'll start my descent, and you might memorize that from the first quick flight. About 35 to 40% should make you stay on the glide slope. Okay, here we go. Finally things are back under control. Don't want to get too high. And now it's time to, here comes the altitude alert. Also fine, now it's time to set the speed cursor to the target speed. It's not going to be 130, that's the reference speed. Target speed is at least 5 knots more. So we're going to 135, and you can see I'm already a little bit high and a little bit slow. We don't want to be below 170, so I'll just use the excess altitude to get some speed back. And usually it's time for the gear at about 2000 feet, but especially during your first few attempts, I recommend not waiting too long with that and dropping the gear in time. Maybe 2500 is a good value. You can see the radio altimeter there came alive, 2700. So let's just go gear down. And when the 3 red lights over here turn green, you go to flaps 15. 1, 2 clicks. Stepping over flaps 5. Now watch your lineup, watch the... See, here comes the ballooning effect. I really need to push down now to keep the nose from rising, to keep the sink rate from getting too small. Passing the outer marker. And at almost 40% NI, N1, the plane doesn't slow down too fast, so things don't happen too quick. And at 150, or just before you get to 150, you want to go to flaps 25. And remember, when you get on speed, then things will start. Or you will need to add the power in time. Here we go, flaps 25. And I'll add a little bit of thrust already. And flaps 30, final setting. Some more thrust. About 52% or so. And then remember the little trick that we had here. Sink rate times 5, the ground speed times 5. Ground speed is 144, so that's about 700 feet per minute. That should keep you on the localize or on the glide slope nicely if you're on it. Of course, if you're high, then you need a little more, and if you're low, then you need less sink rate than that. Okay, now between precision flight view that I have set up for myself here, and then to the outside view, jumping back and forth, and we are ready to go. We have the start switches in continuous, we have the speed brake arm green light, gear down 3 green, flaps 30 green light, landing clearance as well, and we are ready to go. Speed is a little fast, coming back a little here on the N1, making sure that we don't go through the glide slope. Trimming a little bit. I'll move up in my seat a little so I can see a tad better.
400.
A little bit of power again as things stabilize. I'm a little bit high.
300. Minimal 100. 100.
And
50, 40, 30,
brake, power
10.
idle. Reverse. And make Make sure that you stay out of the brakes. The auto brake is working. As soon as you use your toe brakes or any of the keys, then the auto brake will disarm. Passing 70 knots, I'll close the thrust reversers. I'll tap my brakes real quick and you see the auto brake disarm light comes on. And this seems to be a convenient high-speed exit to take. Of course there's a parallel runway here, so don't cross it without clearance. But taxiing is not the subject of this flight. So I'll just stop here, hit the V key, and of course I will set the ground, switch to ground to depressurize the cabin again. I'll move down spoilers, the speed brake, and raise the gear. Flaps of course. Disarm auto brake to off, and we are done with this tutorial flight.